The opulent office, once a fortress of power and self-assurance, now felt like a mausoleum. Marcus Thorne sat slumped behind a vast, mahogany desk, his usual impeccable tailored suit rumpled, his face a ghostly pale. Outside, the city lights blurred into a cynical kaleidoscope, indifferent to the empire crumbling within these very walls. A news anchor's voice, detached and clinical, droned from the oversized television screen, detailing the latest developments in the Thorne Assets corruption scandal, the unraveling of a once unassailable financial dominion. His phone vibrated ceaselessly on the desk, a desperate chorus of calls he no longer had the will to answer. His gaze drifted across the room, past framed accolades and awards, past smiling family photographs now mocking him with their bygone innocence. Each object, a testament to a life built on a foundation of perceived impunity, now felt like a shard of glass in his gut. Fear, cold and absolute, clung to him, a chilling realization that this was not a nightmare from which he could wake. It was the inescapable dawn of his undoing. He slowly lifted his eyes to the television again. The anchor's face was replaced by a split-screen image. On one side, a grim-faced prosecutor. On the other, serene and composed, was Dr. Anya Sharma. Her voice, calm and measured, spoke of inevitable systemic shifts and the imperative of corporate integrity. There was no triumph in her eyes, just a quiet, unwavering resolve. Marcus Thorne's breath hitched. "Anya," he whispered, the name a toxic cocktail of hatred and profound, crushing terror. His world, once infinite, had shrunk to this single, damning reflection of her unwavering gaze. 6 months earlier, Dr. Anya Sharma moved through the gleaming corridors of Orion Global's headquarters with the quiet confidence of a predator at the top of its food chain. Her steps were precise, her posture impeccable, a reflection of the razor-sharp mind that had propelled her to the upper echelons of one of the world's most formidable multinational corporations. Today, she was on the verge of closing a monumental deal, the acquisition of Thorne Assets, a legacy firm valued at a staggering $15 billion. This wasn't just another feather in her cap. It was a testament to years of meticulous strategy, relentless negotiation, and an almost preternatural ability to dissect complex financial landscapes. Her reputation preceded her. Within Orion Global, she was known as the Closer, a negotiator whose calm demeanor belied an unyielding will and an unparalleled capacity for critical analysis. She didn't just win deals, she restructured entire industries, always with an eye on long-term sustainability and ethical governance, principles that Orion Global outwardly championed. For Anya, this particular acquisition was more than just numbers on a balance sheet. It represented a significant expansion into new, lucrative markets, and its successful completion would cement her position as a force to be reckoned with, both within the corporation and in the broader financial world. Across town, Marcus Thorne, the septuagenarian patriarch of Thorne Assets, was a man carved from a different era. His empire had been built on old money, old connections, and a deeply ingrained belief in his own untouchability. His office, filled with antique maps and dark wood, exuded a heavy, almost oppressive sense of history and privilege. Thorne was accustomed to deference, to being the unquestioned authority in his domain. The idea of a young, brilliant woman, especially one who didn't fit his archaic mold, being the architect of his company's future, was an undercurrent of irritation he often struggled to conceal. He saw Orion Global as a necessary evil, a vehicle to secure his family's legacy, but he viewed their emissaries, particularly Anya, with a thinly veiled condescension, a dismissive wave of the hand at new money and diverse hires. He believed he held all the cards, protected by a dense web of local political and economic alliances that had shielded him from accountability for decades. His world was his, and no upstart, no matter how brilliant, could truly threaten it. Not yet. The celebratory pre-acquisition dinner was held in the gilded ballroom of the city's most exclusive private club, a bastion of old-world charm and even older-world sensibilities. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto polished marble floors, and the air hummed with the polite murmur of high society. Anya, elegant in a tailored midnight blue gown, moved with effortless grace, engaging in conversations that spanned global markets and intricate legal clauses. She was the picture of poised professionalism, a testament to Orion Global's forward-thinking ethos, even as she felt the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in the room's atmosphere whenever Marcus Thorne entered or exited a conversation. Thorne, holding court near a towering fireplace, was surrounded by a coterie of local dignitaries, bankers, and lawyers, his loyalists, his protective shield. He exuded an air of genial condescension, a predatory charm that had served him well for decades. When he finally addressed Anya, his words, initially, seemed harmless. "Dr. Sharma, so glad you could make it," he boomed, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You know, Orion Global has quite the reputation for a diverse workforce. Quite progressive." The compliment felt less like praise and more like a thinly veiled observation, a subtle highlighting of her otherness. Throughout the evening, the microaggressions mounted, almost imperceptibly to the casual observer, but cutting deep for Anya. When she offered a strategic insight, Thorne would nod dismissively, then turn to one of her white male colleagues for confirmation, as if her words alone carried less weight. He'd interrupt her mid-sentence, shift the conversation, or make compliments that were backhanded at best. "You've assimilated so quickly," he'd remarked at one point, his eyes twinkling with a patronizing amusement. "For someone from your background, it's quite remarkable how you've grasped our Western business culture." Anya maintained a flawless poker face. Inside, a cold knot of something ancient and primal began to tighten. She had encountered such attitudes before, but rarely with such overt, unashamed confidence. Thorne wasn't just being rude. He was subtly marking his territory, asserting a perceived racial and cultural superiority, all under the guise of casual conversation. Each dismissive gesture, each patronizing remark, was a deliberate erosion of her professional standing, a test of her composure. She met his gaze with an unwavering directness, her internal sensors picking up every slight, every veiled insult. She knew this wasn't just about a deal anymore. It was about power, and Thorne was determined to show her who truly held it in this room. As the evening wore on, the polite veneer of the corporate dinner began to crack. Thorne, emboldened by the silent approval of his sycophantic circle and perhaps a few too many glasses of vintage scotch, decided it was time for his grand performance. He orchestrated a subtle but undeniable shift in the room's focus, drawing all eyes towards Anya. "Dr. Sharma," he began, his voice now carrying a false joviality that grated on Anya's nerves. "We've been discussing the vibrant tapestry of global cultures tonight. And with you here, a shining example of Orion Global's outreach, it would be simply delightful if you could share a little piece of your heritage with us. Perhaps a traditional song? Or a dance? Something exotic." He gestured vaguely, a wide, predatory smile plastered across his face, his eyes twinkling with malicious amusement. His cronies chuckled, a few snickering openly. The air thickened with unspoken racial insensitivity, disguised as a playful request. Anya felt a visceral jolt, a cold wave washing over her. The blood drained from her face for a split second, but her expression remained an impenetrable mask of calm. This was no longer a microaggression. It was a brazen, public degradation designed to belittle her, to strip her of her professional authority and reduce her to a cultural curio for their entertainment. The silence in the room stretched, punctuated only by the clinking of glasses and Thorne's expectant, triumphant gaze. He was reveling in her discomfort, secure in the knowledge that no one in his circle would challenge him. Then, a flicker of something truly chilling ignited in Anya's eyes. Not anger, not fear, but a cold, deadly resolve. She met Thorne's gaze directly, her posture unwavering. Without a word, she inclined her head almost imperceptibly, a gesture that could be interpreted as compliance, or perhaps something far more ominous. She took a slow, deliberate breath, and then, her voice clear and resonant, she began to recite, not a song or a dance, but a complex passage from a classical Sanskrit philosophical text. The words, ancient and profound, filled the room, their meaning lost on most, but their power undeniable. She spoke of justice, of karma, of the inescapable consequences of one's actions, all while maintaining eye contact with Thorne, her expression utterly devoid of emotion. She finished, the final syllables hanging in the air. A stunned silence followed. The chuckles had died. Thorne's triumphant smile had faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then annoyance. He had wanted to humiliate her, to make her perform like a trained animal. Instead, she had turned his weapon back on him, demonstrating not only her vast intellect and dignity, but also a chilling, almost unnerving self-possession. She had given him his cultural performance, but it was a performance designed to haunt him. Her gaze, as she finally broke eye contact, held a promise, clear, unmistakable, and utterly terrifying in its quiet certainty. Anya left the club as soon as professionally permissible, the echoes of her Sanskrit recitation still lingering in the ballroom, a subtle, intellectual poison seeping into the celebratory atmosphere. Her departure was as quiet and composed as her arrival, leaving no visible trace of the internal earthquake she had just endured. Stepping into the cool night air, she felt the meticulous control she always maintained click back into place, even stronger than before. The humiliation had been profound, but it had also clarified something essential. Marcus Thorne, and the system that protected him, was a rot that needed excising. Sliding into the back of her waiting chauffeured car, Anya pulled out her phone. Her fingers, steady and precise, moved across the screen. These weren't calls to her direct manager, nor to Orion Global's legal department, though both would typically be the first points of contact for such a serious breach of professional conduct. Instead, she navigated to a secure, encrypted application, one known to only a select few within the corporation's highest echelons. This was the direct line to the Office of Ethics and Corporate Standards, OECS, an autonomous, immensely powerful internal body within Orion Global, reporting directly to the board of directors with virtually unchecked authority to investigate and rectify systemic integrity breaches globally. She initiated a secure call, the connection instant and encrypted. "This is Dr. Sharma," she stated, her voice calm, devoid of any emotional tremor. "I am activating Protocol Omega. Incident code, Thorne, assets 001. Basis, unacceptable and systemic ethical violations, directly impacting corporate reputation and integrity, originating from the highest levels of the target entity. Requesting immediate, full-scope investigation." The voice on the other end, equally dispassionate, confirmed receipt. "Protocol Omega initiated, Dr. Sharma. Your full report and any relevant preliminary data are requested within the hour. Team deployment within 24 hours. Anya disconnected. Her next action was equally swift and decisive. She composed a concise, formal email, subject, withdrawal of acquisition offer, Thorne assets. Due to unresolvable ethical and governance concerns identified during the pre-acquisition phase, Orion Global officially withdraws its offer for Thorne assets, effective immediately. All further communications regarding this matter will be handled by our Office of Ethics and Corporate Standards. She attached a carefully redacted, preliminary summary of her observations from the evening, ensuring it pointed to systemic issues rather than personal offense. The email was sent to Marcus Thorne and his senior leadership team, with Orion Global's board and general counsel in copy. Across town, Marcus Thorne, basking in the afterglow of his perceived victory, watched his phone buzz with the incoming email. His triumphant smirk froze. He opened it, read the terse message, and felt a cold shock ripple through him. $15 billion, gone. Just like that. His face contorted in a mixture of disbelief and impotent rage. This was the first wave, a mere ripple. He had no idea the tsunami he had just unleashed. He knew she was black and a woman, but he had fatally underestimated Anya Sharma. He hadn't just insulted a person. He had poked a sleeping dragon, an ancient, powerful entity called Orion Global's hidden mechanism, and now it was awake. The immediate aftermath of Anya's email hit Marcus Thorne like a financial tidal wave. $15 billion evaporated in a single, icy corporate communication. His initial reaction was a violent cocktail of disbelief, white-hot fury, and incredulity. He paced his opulent office, his face flushed, bellowing into his phone. A woman's tantrum. An emotional outburst. This is simply unprofessional, an overreaction to a minor social faux pas. He refused to believe it could be anything more than a capricious act by a sensitive individual. He immediately leveraged his extensive network. Calls flew to local politicians he had funded, to influential business figures indebted to him, to the local press he had long controlled. His message was consistent. Orion Global was backing out due to unforeseen market conditions, and this, Dr. Sharma, was an unstable element. He pushed for discreet pressure to be applied, for subtle hints to be dropped, for the deal to be resurrected. He was Marcus Thorne. He always got his way. Then, a new development. A small, unassuming team arrived in the city, discreetly setting up a temporary office in a neutral corporate building. They introduced themselves as the Orion Global Ethics and Standards Review Team, stating their purpose was a routine post-withdrawal audit to understand the factors contributing to the aborted acquisition. Their leader, a calm, meticulously dressed woman named Eleanor Vance, exuded a quiet authority that belied her gentle demeanor. Thorne, initially, was unimpressed. An internal audit? From a giant corporation like Orion? About a deal they walked away from? He chuckled to his legal team. They're just trying to save face. Send them our standard compliance documents. Tell them we're fully transparent. A few pleasantries, a bit of corporate theater, and they'll be gone by the end of the week. He saw Vance and her team as mere bureaucrats, easily managed, easily dismissed. He instructed his staff to cooperate minimally, providing only what was strictly necessary, confident that his local connections and his carefully cultivated image would protect him from any genuine scrutiny. He was accustomed to audits being superficial, easily appeased. He had no idea the true nature of the hidden mechanism Anya had activated, nor the silent, methodical force that Eleanor Vance and her team represented. They were not there to save face. They were there to dissect, to unearth, and to ultimately dismantle. Eleanor Vance and her team from the OECS were models of efficiency and understated diligence. They moved with an almost invisible precision, their presence initially perceived by Thorne and his staff as a minor bureaucratic inconvenience. Vance herself, with her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing, was polite to a fault, her questions seemingly innocuous. They began, as expected, with inquiries about the failed acquisition, the due diligence process, the valuation, the negotiation points. Thorne's legal team, confident in their carefully prepared narrative, provided textbook answers, complete with reams of documents designed to show Thorne assets in the most favorable light. But then, the questions began to subtly shift. Could you tell us about the corporate culture within Thorne Assets? Vance asked one afternoon, her voice soft but insistent. Specifically, how do you foster an inclusive environment? Another team member, a young man with sharp eyes and an even sharper intellect, requested detailed records of employee grievances, internal HR investigations, and exit interviews from the past 5 years. Standard procedure, he murmured when Thorne's HR director raised an eyebrow. Just looking for any cultural friction that might impact future acquisitions. Thorne, initially dismissive, started to feel a prickle of unease. Culture? What does culture have to do with a $15 billion deal? He grumbled to his chief counsel. They're overreaching. His counsel, a man who had weathered many local audits, assured him it was nothing. Just probing. Show them we're transparent. Give them the sanitized versions. They'll get bored. However, the OECS team wasn't getting bored. Instead, their inquiries became more precise, more targeted. They requested access to the company's diversity and inclusion training records, finding them conspicuously sparse or non-existent. They asked about specific complaints that had been filed and then mysteriously disappeared from the official log. They even subtly inquired about the guest list and event planning for the pre-acquisition dinner, a detail that made Thorne's stomach clench. Vance and her team weren't just asking questions. They were connecting dots that Thorne hadn't even known existed. They cross-referenced public records with internal documents, noticing discrepancies in environmental compliance reports. They spoke to mid-level employees who, under the OECS's guaranteed anonymity and Orion Global's formidable legal protections, began to hesitantly share stories of systemic bullying, veiled threats, and a pervasive culture of fear that had long silenced dissent. Thorne's local system of protection, built on favors and intimidation, was suddenly finding itself inadequate. These weren't local investigators who could be swayed by a phone call or a well-placed donation. These were outsiders, armed with an unprecedented mandate from a global power, and their questions were starting to feel less like an audit and more like an excavation. The first cracks in his impenetrable facade were appearing, subtle but undeniable, and a faint, cold dread began to seep into Marcus Thorne's meticulously controlled world. While the OECS team meticulously worked its way through Thorne assets, Anya Sharma remained largely out of public sight, a ghost in the machine. She wasn't leading the direct investigation, but her influence was a palpable undercurrent. From her secure office at Orion Global Headquarters, she quietly orchestrated, her directives channeled through encrypted communications to Eleanor Vance. Anya knew Thorne's weaknesses, not just from the humiliating dinner, but from her weeks of exhaustive due diligence for the acquisition. She had uncovered anomalies then, red flags she had initially brushed aside as minor risks in a lucrative deal. Now, those anomalies were the threads she was pulling. Focus on the environmental compliance reports from 2018 to 2020 for the Northwood facility. Anya's brief, precise email to Vance read. Cross-reference with local news archives for any unexplained health incidents in the vicinity during that period. Another message might suggest, examine employee turnover rates in the marketing department, particularly women and minority staff, between 2015 and 2019. Look for patterns in their exit agreements. She wasn't just directing. She was providing the OECS with a finely honed roadmap, informed by her unique perspective and an intuitive understanding of where the rot would lie. The OECS, empowered by Anya's initial activation of Protocol Omega and armed with Orion Global's vast resources, began to unearth layer after layer of Thorne's past transgressions. What started as an inquiry into corporate culture quickly morphed into a full-blown forensic investigation. They found evidence of systemic discrimination in hiring practices, with preferential treatment given to a select, homogeneous group. Cases of sexual harassment, quietly settled and buried by hefty non-disclosure agreements, began to resurface as brave former employees, guaranteed protection by Orion Global, stepped forward. The environmental violations at the Northwood facility, initially dismissed as minor regulatory oversights, were revealed to be deliberate cost-cutting measures that had led to documented, though previously suppressed, health crises in the surrounding, predominantly low-income communities. Financial irregularities, disguised as complex accounting maneuvers, pointed to dubious transactions with shell corporations, many of which had shadowy links to Thorne's local political patrons. It became increasingly clear that these weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a deeply entrenched pattern, enabled and actively covered up by Thorne's local system. His network of power, the very same one that had given him a sense of untouchability, had been complicit in his abuses. The investigation was no longer just about Marcus Thorne. It was about the entire corrupt edifice he had built and maintained, the layers of complicity that stretched far beyond his office. The OECS was pulling at a thread, and the entire tapestry of local power and corruption was beginning to unravel. The whispers of routine audit had long since evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of panic that rippled through the city's elite. Thorne's inner circle, the local politicians, the judges, the police chiefs, the powerful business partners who had long benefited from his patronage and protected his secrets, finally grasped the true nature of the storm brewing. This was no ordinary local inquiry that could be squashed with a few phone calls or a well-placed donation. Eleanor Vance and her OECS team were unyielding, unaffected by threats or bribes, operating under a mandate that transcended local jurisdiction. They were the emissaries of a global entity, too vast and too powerful to be intimidated by regional influence. This is an overreach, an assault on our local economy. One of Thorne's closest political allies fumed, desperately trying to rally support. But their attempts to intervene were futile. When a local city council member tried to pull strings to deny the OECS team certain permits or access, Orion Global's legal department, with a quiet but firm hand, reminded them of international corporate law and the potential for federal and even global scrutiny. Any attempt to obstruct the OECS investigation only served to highlight their own complicity, drawing the investigative spotlight onto themselves. Marcus Thorne, once the undisputed king of his domain, found himself increasingly isolated. His phone, which once rang constantly with offers of support and updates from his network, now remained eerily silent. His protectors were distancing themselves, suddenly too busy to take his calls, their own reputations now at stake. The fear in their eyes was mirrored in his own. He tried to discredit Anya Sharma, planting rumors of her being overly sensitive or vindictive, but Orion Global's PR machine, vast and efficient, swiftly countered every whisper. Her reputation remained unblemished, her professionalism unassailable. Any attack on her was an attack on Orion Global itself, and they were prepared to defend their own. He felt the walls closing in. Vance's team, armed with irrefutable evidence, presented Thorne with a litany of charges: fraud, systemic discrimination, environmental negligence, and a pattern of abusing power for personal gain. Each accusation was backed by meticulous data, witness statements, and undeniable paper trails. Thorne, in his delusion, had believed his local system was impenetrable. He had failed to account for a force that operated outside its boundaries, a force activated by a woman he had so carelessly underestimated. The ground beneath his empire was not merely cracking, it was collapsing into a chasm, and there was nowhere left to run. The OECS's investigation had become an unrelenting siege. Eleanor Vance's team, having meticulously mapped out Thorne's network of corruption, now methodically dismantled it piece by piece. They uncovered hidden offshore accounts, shell companies used to funnel illicit gains, and meticulously documented instances of political favors exchanged for regulatory leniency. No stone was left unturned. They secured sworn affidavits from a growing number of former Thorne Assets employees, people who had suffered in silence for years, too terrified to speak out, but who now, under the ironclad protection of Orion Global, found their voices. These included whistleblowers with damning internal emails, recordings of abusive conversations, and detailed accounts of financial malfeasance that had been skillfully obscured. The psychological pressure on Thorne was immense. The media, initially swayed by his public relations efforts, had begun to turn. Carefully managed leaks from anonymous sources, subtly guided by Anya and the OECS, started appearing in reputable national and international outlets. These stories, couched in cautious but damning language, detailed the unfolding ethical scandal at Thorne Assets, hinting at a broader pattern of corporate malfeasance. Public opinion began to shift dramatically. His carefully constructed image as a benevolent patriarch was crumbling, replaced by that of a ruthless, corrupt baron. Thorne, now a ghost in his own company, found his every move scrutinized. His loyalists were either cooperating with the OECS, desperately trying to save themselves, or had simply vanished. His lawyers, once confident, now looked grim, advising him that his legal options were dwindling. The evidence against him was not just substantial, it was overwhelming and meticulously cross-referenced. The OECS had built an airtight case, one designed not just to penalize, but to dismantle. He saw Anya's hand in it all, even though she remained unseen. Her calculated silence, her unwavering composure during the public humiliation, now resonated as a chilling prophecy. He had dismissed her, disrespected her, seen her as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. Now, he realized, she was the architect of his ruin, the calm, unyielding force that had activated a system far grander and more impartial than his petty local fiefdom. His world had shrunk from an empire to a cage, and the bars were closing in. The stage was set, not for a negotiation, but for a reckoning. The grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious convention center, a place usually reserved for economic forums and charity galas, had been transformed into a stark arena of judgment. News cameras from around the globe lined the walls, their lenses hungry, recording every detail. At the front, a long table hosted Eleanor Vance and her OECS team, flanked by a phalanx of legal counsel from Orion Global. On a raised platform to the side, a solitary chair stood for Marcus Thorne, who looked significantly older and more disheveled than his public persona had ever allowed. His usually immaculate suit was noticeably ill-fitting, his eyes hollow, haunted by weeks of sleepless nights and dwindling hope. Then, Dr. Anya Sharma entered, not from the main entrance, but from a side door, taking a seat among a panel of Orion global executives and ethics experts. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored black suit, her expression composed, her gaze unwavering. There was no triumph, no gloating, just a quiet, profound presence that commanded respect. Her arrival sent a ripple through the assembled press. Her role, initially obscured, was now becoming devastatingly clear. Eleanor Vance began her presentation, her voice calm, but imbued with the weight of absolute authority. She meticulously detailed the findings of the OECS investigation. She started, chillingly, with the incident at the pre-acquisition dinner. A junior OECS investigator projected high-resolution photographs onto a massive screen, stills captured from discrete security footage of that night. Thorne's sneering smile, his demeaning gestures, Anya's composed, dignified response, it was all laid bare. The narrative was not framed as a personal offense, but as a vivid illustration of Thorne's deeply ingrained culture of superiority and disdain, a symptom of the systemic rot that permeated Thorne assets. This, Vance stated, her voice resonating, was not an isolated lapse in judgment. It was a clear demonstration of a CEO who believed himself above accountability, leveraging his position to publicly denigrate a highly respected professional based on outdated, discriminatory prejudices. From there, Vance moved swiftly to the more egregious violations, the environmental cover-ups, complete with internal memos and expert testimony on the resulting health crises, the systematic racial and gender discrimination in hiring and promotion, supported by anonymous testimonials and statistical data, the financial fraud, meticulously traced through complex ledgers and bank statements that linked Thorne directly to his complicit patrons. The evidence was irrefutable, each piece building upon the last, forming an inescapable narrative of systemic abuse of power. Marcus Thorne, watching his life unravel on a giant screen, finally broke. His face, already pale, turned ashen. He tried to speak, to deny, but the words caught in his throat. He looked at Anya, sitting calmly, observing him with that same unreadable, chillingly resolute gaze he remembered from that night. He was witnessing his own downfall, a live, global broadcast of his empire's collapse, orchestrated with the cold, precise vengeance of the woman he had so foolishly humiliated. His arrogance, his perceived untouchability, had been his fatal flaw. He was not just defeated. He was utterly, irrevocably exposed and humiliated, exactly as he had once tried to do to her. The scene from the prologue was now fully realized, its context brutally complete. The verdict, though delivered by an internal corporate body, carried the weight of a global judgment. Eleanor Vance concluded her presentation with a summary of the OECS's recommendations, which Orion Global's board of directors had already ratified. Effective immediately, Vance announced, her voice echoing through the stunned silence of the ballroom. Marcus Thorne is permanently removed from all executive and board positions at Thorne Assets and any associated entities. All his executive and personal assets tied to the proven illicit activities are frozen, pending further legal action. Furthermore, Orion Global will be formally cooperating with state and federal authorities to initiate criminal investigations into multiple counts of fraud, environmental negligence, and systemic discrimination against Mr. Thorne and his identified accomplices. The cameras flashed blindingly as Thorne slumped in his chair, his face a mask of utter devastation. The local protectors he had relied on for so long were also named. Their intricate web of corruption, painstakingly unwound by the OECS, was now exposed to the world. A prominent city councilman, a state senator, and several high-ranking local business figures found their names read aloud, implicating them in the financial and ethical breaches. Their careers, built on decades of backroom deals and mutual protection, were instantly shattered. The ripple effect was immediate. News channels cut to live reports of police raiding offices, warrants being issued, and stock prices of associated companies plummeting. But the OECS's mandate went beyond just punishment. Vance continued, detailing the systemic changes Orion Global would implement as a direct result of this investigation. Orion Global is establishing a new industry-wide benchmark for ethical governance and corporate responsibility. We will be launching a comprehensive, independent oversight committee for all acquired entities, with stringent new reporting requirements on diversity, environmental impact, and employee welfare. Furthermore, we are committing substantial resources to support the communities directly harmed by Thorn Assets actions, including a multi-million-dollar fund for environmental restoration and victim compensation. Anya Sharma, watching from her seat, felt a profound sense of satisfaction, a quiet justice. This was not about revenge, but about balance. She had not only canceled a deal, she had brought down an empire built on prejudice and corruption, setting a powerful precedent. The repercussions extended far beyond Marcus Thorne. His downfall was a signal, a stark warning to anyone who believed their power and privilege made them untouchable. The hidden mechanism had not just delivered a sentence, it had reset the scales. Days turned into weeks, then months. The tremors from the Thorn Assets scandal continued to shake the financial world and local politics. Marcus Thorne, once a titan, was now a pariah, facing a barrage of lawsuits and criminal charges. His carefully cultivated empire was being systematically dismantled, its assets liquidated, its name forever tarnished. His protectors, stripped of their power and influence, faced similar fates, their fall from grace a stark warning across the industry. The communities harmed by Thorne's negligence began the long process of healing, supported by Orion Global's reparations and new, stricter environmental oversight. Anya Sharma, the quiet architect of this seismic shift, felt a profound sense of catharsis, not in the destruction, but in the restoration of balance. She never publicly boasted about her role. Her actions were never about personal glory or vengeance. They were about upholding principles, about demonstrating that true power lay not in the abuse of authority, but in the unwavering commitment to justice and ethical governance. The OECS, now more prominent than ever, had become a formidable watchdog, its Protocol Omega, a known, feared entity for any corporation daring to partner with Orion Global. Back in her office at Orion Global headquarters, Anya sat before a panoramic window, the city sprawling beneath her. She was engaged in a new, even more ambitious project, spearheading a global initiative to embed ethical AI frameworks into financial algorithms, a task requiring immense intellectual rigor and an unshakable moral compass. Her reputation, already stellar, had grown exponentially. She was seen not just as a brilliant dealmaker, but as a guardian of integrity, a leader who understood that the future of business depended on accountability and respect for all. There was no celebratory dinner, no public triumph for Anya. Her victory was a quiet, internal one, a deep satisfaction born from seeing a corrupt system brought to its knees by the very principles it had sought to undermine. She had waged a silent war and emerged victorious, not by raising her voice in anger, but by methodically activating the mechanisms of higher justice. She paused, looking out at the city, a place of immense power and potential, now slightly cleaner, slightly more accountable. Her gaze was firm, calm, and resolute. She had not only canceled a deal, she had redefined what it meant to hold power, raising the bar for everyone who dared to wield it. The sun, a new dawn, broke over the cityscape, casting long, promising shadows. The world was still imperfect, but she had shown that even the deepest-seated corruption could be challenged, exposed, and ultimately overcome. The unseen battle had ended, and justice, though slow and invisible, had prevailed.